a microphone, a smile that could light up a stadium, and 22 years of proving that happiness doesn't require perfection. When Danny the Jokester Wilson walked onto the America's Got Talent stage, he wasn't looking for sympathy, inspiration points, or special treatment. He was looking to do something he'd been doing since he could talk, make people laugh. Simon Cowell had seen every kind of act imaginable, but he'd never seen anything like Danny, a young man with Down syndrome who understood something most comedians never learn, that the best humor comes from the heart, not the head. What happened next would challenge every assumption about comedy, ability, and what it means to be funny. When Danny's jokes had the notoriously tough Simon Cowell laughing so hard he couldn't catch his breath, it became clear that this wasn't just entertainment, this was education in the most joyful form possible. Danny was about to prove that some of life's greatest teachers come in unexpected packages, and sometimes the most profound wisdom sounds exactly like laughter. Let me take you back to the moments before Danny Wilson showed the world that different doesn't mean less funny, it means differently funny, which might be the best kind of all. It was Friday evening at the Dolby Theater in Los Angeles, and America's Got Talent was in the middle of its most diverse season yet. The energy was electric, as always, with 300-400 audience members filling the iconic red seats, their excitement building for each new act. Simon Cowell sat at the judges' table in his signature black t-shirt and perfectly tailored blazer, his expression carrying that familiar mixture of skepticism and curiosity that had defined his judging style for over 2 decades. Sofia Vergara was adjusting her sparkly silver dress while chatting with Heidi Klum about the previous act, a young magician who had earned enthusiastic applause. Howie Mandel was doing what he did best between acts, keeping the energy light with quick jokes and observations. Terry Crews worked the crowd with his infectious enthusiasm, building anticipation for the next performer. The evening had already delivered several memorable moments. A singing duo had earned a standing ovation, a dance crew had brought the house down, and an elderly woman's story song about her late husband had left hardly a dry eye in the theater. But backstage, something uniquely joyful was about to unfold. Danny Wilson sat in the contestant waiting area, his leg bouncing with excitement rather than nerves. At 22, he had the kind of infectious energy that made everyone around him smile, even when they didn't know why. His mother, Linda Wilson, sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, fighting back tears of pride and worry. "You sure you're ready for this, sweetie?" Linda asked for the 10th time, though she already knew the answer. Danny had been ready for this moment his entire life. "Mom, I was born ready," Danny replied, with a grin that took up half his face. "I've been making people laugh since I could talk. Remember what Mrs. Patterson said in kindergarten?" Linda smiled despite her nerves. She remembered perfectly. She said you were the class comedian and that you had a gift for making even the grumpiest kids giggle. "And I've only gotten funnier since then," Danny said with complete confidence. "Plus, I have secret weapons now." "What secret weapons?" Danny's grin became mischievous. "My Down syndrome. Most people don't expect someone like me to be funny on purpose. They think we're funny by accident. Wait till they see what happens when I'm funny on purpose." Linda's heart swelled with pride and broke a little at the same time. Danny had been facing low expectations his entire life, but instead of letting them discourage him, he'd learned to use them as setup for his punchlines. From the time Danny was small, he'd been different from other children with Down syndrome. While many were quiet and needed encouragement to speak up, Danny had never met a stage he didn't want to be on or an audience he couldn't win over. He'd been telling jokes since he could form sentences, making up silly songs since he could carry a tune, and finding humor in situations where others saw only difficulty. "I'm not disabled," he'd tell anyone who would listen. "I'm differently abled. I'm able to be happy in ways other people can't figure out." The path to AGT hadn't been traditional. Danny had started performing at local comedy open mic nights 2 years ago, usually the only performer with an intellectual disability, but never the least funny person in the room. Word had spread through Los Angeles's comedy community about the young man with Down syndrome who could get laughs from the toughest crowds. A talent scout had seen him at the Comedy Store 6 months ago and been amazed not just by Danny's natural timing, but by his ability to address his disability with humor that was self-aware without being self-deprecating, confident without being defensive. "Danny Wilson," called Maria, one of the production assistants. "You're on in 2 minutes." Danny jumped up with an energy that made everyone in the waiting area smile. He was wearing his lucky shirt, a bright red button-up that his mom had bought him for his first open mic night, and his confidence was absolutely infectious. "Mom, this is it," he said, bouncing slightly on his toes. "This is where I show the world that funny is funny, no matter what package it comes in." Linda stood up and hugged her son carefully, mindful of the wireless microphone pack clipped to his belt. "I'm so proud of you, Danny. Win or lose, you're already my champion." "Thanks, Mom, but I'm not planning to lose. I've got jokes that haven't failed me yet, and a secret weapon these judges have never seen before." "What's your secret weapon?" Danny's smile became even bigger, if that was possible. "Joy, Mom. Pure, unfiltered joy. Most comedians are angry. Or sad or bitter, I'm just happy, and happy is funny." Terry Crew's voice boomed across the theater. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Danny the Jokester Wilson." The curtain rose, and Danny walked onto the stage with a bounce in his step that immediately caught the audience's attention. The reaction was immediate and mixed. The audience applauded enthusiastically, but there was an undertone of uncertainty. Danny's Down syndrome features were immediately apparent, and many people in the audience weren't sure what to expect. Were they about to see an inspirational story, a feel-good moment, something they should applaud regardless of quality? Simon leaned forward in his chair, his expression shifting to one of genuine curiosity. In 20 years of judging, he'd seen performers with various disabilities, but something about Danny's energy suggested this might be different from the typical overcoming adversity narrative. "Good evening," Danny called out enthusiastically, his voice carrying clearly through the theater. "Wow, this place is fancy. I feel like I should have worn my good shirt." "Oh, wait, this is my good shirt." The audience chuckled, charmed by his genuine enthusiasm. Terry approached with his characteristic warmth. "Welcome to AGT. What's your name?" "Danny Wilson, but my friends call me the Jokester, and after tonight, I'm hoping that'll be all of you," Danny replied with perfect timing. "And where are you from, Danny?" "Los Angeles, born and raised. City of Angels, baby. Though I gotta say, most of the angels I've met here are struggling actors waiting tables, so maybe the marketing department oversold it a little." The audience laughed more genuinely this time, beginning to understand that Danny's humor was intentional and well-crafted. "So what are you going to do for us tonight?" Terry continued. Danny's expression became more focused, more serious, but his eyes still sparkled with mischief. "I'm going to do stand-up comedy, and before anyone starts thinking, 'Oh, this is going to be inspirational,' relax. I'm not here to inspire anybody. I'm here to make you laugh so hard you forget to feel sorry for me." Simon's eyebrows raised. This was definitely not what he'd expected. "You see," Danny continued, "I have Down syndrome. I know, huge shock. But here's the thing. I'm probably happier than anyone in this room. And that's not because I don't understand how hard life is. It's because I understand something most people don't. Being different is only a disadvantage if you let other people decide what normal means." The audience was beginning to lean in, sensing that they were about to hear something special. "All right, Danny," Terry said, stepping back with a smile. "The stage is yours." The lights dimmed slightly, creating a more intimate comedy club atmosphere. Danny adjusted his microphone with practiced ease and looked out at the audience with complete confidence. "So, Down syndrome," he began, and the audience held its breath, unsure where this was going. "Let me clear some things up for those of you who have never met someone like me. First question people always ask, are you okay? I'm fine. I mean, I have better health insurance than most of you because I qualify for so many programs. I'm like the most covered person in America. I'm practically indestructible." The audience began to laugh, realizing that Danny was in complete control of his material and his message. "Second question, do you live independently?" Well, I live with my mom, but so do half the millennials in Los Angeles, and none of them have an excuse involving chromosomes. At least I have a medical reason. What's yours, Tyler, who graduated film school 5 years ago? Simon found himself chuckling, despite his usual reserve. Danny's timing was impeccable, and his observations were genuinely funny. People think having Down syndrome means I'm perpetually happy. That's not true. I get sad, I get angry, I get frustrated. The difference is I bounce back faster because I don't have the attention span to stay miserable for very long. It's like having a built-in reset button. Very convenient. The audience was warming up, laughing more freely as they realized Danny's humor was smart, self-aware, and genuinely entertaining. Dating is interesting when you have Down syndrome. People never know if I'm being charming or if I just don't understand social cues. Plot twist, I'm actually just charming, but it does give me an advantage. If a joke doesn't land, I can just look confused and people think it's cute instead of awkward. Sophia was visibly enjoying herself, laughing and nodding along. Heidi was taking notes, but also clearly entertained. Howie was watching with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for acts that genuinely impressed him. But it was Simon's reaction that was most notable. The man who had built his reputation on being hard to please was not just smiling, he was actively fighting back laughter. "You know what's funny?" Danny continued. "People always want to know what it's like to have Down syndrome. I want to know what it's like not to have it. Do you people just walk around being stressed all the time? Because that sounds exhausting. I wake up every day excited about breakfast. When's the last time cereal made you genuinely happy? You're missing out." The audience was now fully engaged, laughing not because they felt they should, but because Danny was genuinely funny. "My mom worries about me performing. She says, 'Danny, what if people don't understand your humor?' I told her, 'Mom, if someone doesn't think I'm funny, that's not a reflection on my comedy skills. That's a reflection on their ability to recognize joy when they see it.'" Simon was now openly smiling, completely drawn in by Danny's infectious energy and surprisingly sophisticated comedic sensibility. "I do comedy because I realized something important. Most comedians are angry at the world. They complain about everything: traffic, relationships, politics, their families. I look at all that stuff and think, yeah, but have you tried ice cream? Ice cream exists, people. How can you be mad when ice cream exists?" The audience was now laughing consistently, and Danny was clearly feeding off their energy, his confidence growing with each successful joke. "People ask me about my future goals. They want to know if I have realistic expectations." Realistic? I'm a guy with Down syndrome doing stand-up comedy on national television. If I can make Simon Cowell laugh, I can do anything. That's not realistic. That's miraculous. At the mention of his name, Simon looked up, and Danny made direct eye contact with him, grinning widely. "Speaking of Simon Cowell, sir, I have to say, your reputation precedes you. People told me you're tough, critical, hard to please, but I looked at your picture and I thought, that man just needs a good joke. Am I right?" Simon couldn't help himself. He laughed out loud, a genuine, surprised laugh that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "There it is," Danny exclaimed, pointing at Simon. "Ladies and gentlemen, I got Simon Cowell to laugh. Someone call my mom. I'm basically famous now." The audience erupted, not just at the joke, but at the sight of Simon Cowell genuinely cracking up, his usually controlled demeanor completely abandoned. "You know what the best part about having Down syndrome is?" Danny continued, building to his closing. "I get to live in a world where simple things make me incredibly happy. Most people need drugs or therapy or expensive vacations to feel joy. Me, I see a dog wearing a sweater and my day is made. You're all working so hard to be happy, and I'm over here getting the same feeling from a really good sandwich." The audience was now in full appreciation mode, recognizing that they were witnessing something special, not inspiration porn, but genuine talent wrapped in an unexpected package. So, here's my advice to everyone watching. Stop making happiness so complicated, laugh at yourself, find joy in simple things, and remember, being normal is overrated. I've met normal people, and they're not that great. Trust me, different is better, different is more fun, different is... Danny paused for effect, looking directly at the judges. "Different is hilarious." Danny took a small bow as he delivered his final line. "Thank you. You've been a wonderful audience, and remember, if you can't find something to laugh about today, you're not looking hard enough." The applause that followed was immediate and sustained, but it was different from typical AGT applause. This wasn't polite recognition or emotional response to a heartwarming story. This was the sound of people who had been genuinely entertained by a legitimately funny performer who happened to have Down syndrome rather than someone they were applauding because of his disability. But the real story was happening at the judges' table. Simon Cowell was still laughing, not the polite chuckle of a professional trying to be encouraging, but deep, authentic laughter that seemed to surprise him as much as anyone else. His carefully maintained composure had completely cracked, and he was wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. Sophia was beaming, clapping enthusiastically, and shaking her head in amazement. Heidi was laughing and taking notes simultaneously, clearly impressed by Danny's technical skill as much as his charm. Howie was grinning from ear to ear, nodding in recognition of a fellow comedian who understood the craft. As the applause died down, Simon was the first to speak, but he had to pause several times to stop laughing long enough to form coherent words. "Danny," he began, and then started chuckling again. "I need to catch my breath for a moment." The audience laughed at Simon's reaction, and Danny beamed with pride. "Okay," Simon continued, composing himself slightly. "Danny, I have to tell you something. I've been judging talent for over 20 years. I've seen thousands of comedians, from amateur open mic performers to headliners selling out arenas." Danny listened intently, his smile never wavering. "What you just did wasn't just comedy. What you just did was masterful. Your timing is impeccable. Your material is original and intelligent, and your stage presence is absolutely magnetic." The audience murmured with approval, and Danny's smile somehow managed to get even bigger. "But more than that," Simon continued, "you just taught this entire theater something important. You taught us that funny is funny, period. Not funny for someone with Down syndrome, not funny considering the circumstances, just genuinely, authentically funny." Sophia jumped in enthusiastically. "Danny, you had me laughing from your first joke. You are naturally gifted, and your joy is absolutely infectious." Heidi nodded in agreement. "I was taking notes on your technique because you have better timing than comedians I've seen with decades of experience. You're the real deal." Howie, speaking as a fellow comedian, was perhaps the most meaningful in his praise. "Danny, comedy is the hardest thing to do well. Making people laugh requires intelligence, timing, confidence, and authenticity. You have all of that in spades. Welcome to the comedy club. You've earned your place here." But it was Simon's final comment that would become the most quoted moment of the evening. "Danny," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that surprised everyone who heard it, "you came here tonight and proved something beautiful. You proved that the best comedians aren't the ones who complain about life. They're the ones who find reasons to celebrate it." Simon stood up from his chair, something he rarely did during critiques. "You also proved something else. You proved that happiness really is a choice, and joy really is contagious. In a world that can be pretty dark sometimes, we need people like you to remind us what laughter is for." Simon looked directly at Danny, his expression serious but warm. "Danny Wilson, you didn't just make us laugh tonight, you made us better. You reminded us that the best humor comes from the biggest hearts, and yours is clearly enormous." Without another word, Simon reached for his golden buzzer. "Danny the Jokester. Wilson, you are going straight to the live shows, and more than that, you're taking a message with you that the world needs to hear. Different doesn't mean less, it just means more interesting." He slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer. Golden confetti exploded from the ceiling, covering the stage in a shimmering celebration. But the most beautiful moment wasn't the confetti or the music or the cheering audience. It was Danny, standing center stage with his arms raised in triumph, his face radiating pure joy, looking out at an audience that had learned something important about happiness, humor, and the power of embracing what makes you different. Terry Crews ran onto the stage and lifted Danny's hand in victory. Ladies and gentlemen, Danny the Jokester Wilson, proving that laughter really is the best medicine. As the celebration continued, the cameras captured a moment that would become legendary in AGT history. Danny walking over to the judges' table and shaking Simon's hand. "Thank you for laughing," Danny said simply. "That's all I ever wanted, for people to laugh with me instead of at me." Simon's response was immediate and heartfelt. "Danny, after tonight, everyone's going to be laughing with you. That's a promise." 3 months later, Danny Wilson won America's Got Talent, becoming the first comedian with Down syndrome to win a major televised talent competition. His victory performance was a routine about winning that had the entire audience in stitches while simultaneously moving them to tears. But the numbers and awards weren't the real story. The real story was in the thousands of messages Danny received from people with disabilities who said his performance gave them courage to pursue their own dreams. It was in the comedy clubs that began actively seeking out performers with disabilities. It was in the families who stopped seeing their special needs children as limited and started seeing them as uniquely gifted. Danny's success opened doors not just for himself, but for an entire community of performers who had been overlooked by an industry that hadn't known how to see past disability to recognize ability. His debut comedy special, Differently Funny, broke streaming records and proved that audiences were hungry for humor that came from joy rather than cynicism. His book, The Jokester's Guide to Happiness, became a bestseller and is now used in therapeutic programs worldwide. But perhaps Danny's most important contribution was the Danny Wilson Comedy Workshop, a program he developed to help other people with intellectual disabilities find their voices through humor. The program has graduated dozens of performers who are now working in comedy clubs, corporate events, and therapeutic settings across the country. During his sold-out show at the Hollywood Bowl, Danny looked out at an audience of 17,500 people and delivered what would become his signature closing. 2 years ago, people looked at me and saw limitations. Tonight, you're looking at me and seeing possibilities. The only thing that changed was perspective. I'm still the same guy who gets excited about breakfast and thinks dogs in sweaters are hilarious. The difference is, now you understand that there's nothing wrong with that. There's everything right with that. He paused, looking directly into the camera that was broadcasting his special. To everyone watching who feels different, who's been told they're not enough, who's been made to feel like their joy doesn't matter, you're wrong. Your joy is exactly what this world needs. Don't let anyone convince you that happiness requires justification. Be different, be joyful, be yourself, and if anyone has a problem with that, just remember, they're the ones missing out on breakfast excitement and dog sweater appreciation. That's their loss. The lesson Danny Wilson taught America that night on AGT is simple but profound. The best humor doesn't come from anger, cynicism, or superiority. It comes from joy, authenticity, and the courage to find reasons to laugh even when the world gives you plenty of reasons not to. Simon Cowell learned that being a judge isn't just about recognizing technical skill. Sometimes it's about recognizing when someone has mastered something far more important than their craft, when they've mastered the art of being genuinely, authentically happy. And Danny proved that the most powerful performance is sometimes just being yourself, fully and unapologetically, and inviting the world to celebrate the beautiful difference that makes you uniquely you. The golden confetti from that night has been swept away. But the golden moment it represented when a young man with Down syndrome made the world understand that different can be delightful, that limitations can become launching pads, and that the best comedy comes from the biggest hearts, that moment continues to inspire, to challenge assumptions, and to prove that sometimes the most important laughter is the kind that changes how we see each other. In the end, Danny Wilson didn't just win a talent competition, he won something more valuable. He won the right to be seen as funny first, disabled second, And in doing so, he gave that same gift to countless others who had been waiting their whole lives for someone to laugh with them instead of at them. Because sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply being joyful, and sometimes the most powerful message is delivered with a punchline and a smile.